Hi, welcome to the Tournament Center. I'm Zac Hill, and I'm joined by Grand Prix London champion and Great Britain national champion Daniel Royde. Now, we're here to talk about one of the pillars of the format, one of the most popular decks that's being played today, and that deck is Jund. Dan, can you tell us, why did you decide to play Jund?
So Jund is kind of the most obvious deck in the format. It's been around for a while. It's not amazing against anything, it's not bad against anything. People can't decide to beat it, you get to play Magic each time as long as you draw some lands. It's relatively straightforward to play, it's not a complicated combo deck. So it's a solid, obvious deck choice. We tested the format quite a lot and we didn't think that we could break anything or do anything particularly clever, so we thought stick with what we know. The Jund decks have been around and therefore all of the lists are relatively well tested and it's clear what you're trying to do. You know that your list is at least reasonable. You're definitely not going to lose all your rounds.
Right, and the goal is not to play the fanciest deck at the tournament. The goal is to win the tournament, and that worked for Yuya Watanabe at the Players' Championship, so really a solid choice. So for everybody at home that hasn't played a million games of Modern, let's start walking through the cards in the Jund deck and talking about what makes it work. So we see right here the threats of the deck. Now, again, very good cards. We see Tarmogoyf, Dark Confidant, Bloodbraid Elf, and Kitchen Finks. These are the core of the deck. Why are these cards so powerful?
So Tarmogoyf, I suppose if you haven't seen it before, is a very big card for 2 mana. He gets to usually be easily a 3/4. That will happen because they're playing fetch lands in the format. And then usually sorceries, instants, and creatures end up in the graveyard. So he's almost always a 4/5 for 2 mana, which is great. And then because of other cards you play in the deck, there are artifacts and planeswalkers floating around, he sometimes gets even huger. And you get to kill people very quickly with that.
Right, and so we talked about a great 2-mana threat in Tarmogoyf. Now, Dark Confidant, again, it's become one of the most powerful cards in Magic. When Ravnica was released, it was actually the second least popular card in the set amongst many players. So just Confidant, Bloodbraid Elf, Kitchen Finks, they're all cards that kill the opponent, generate advantage. Why are they so important to the deck?
So you can't, in a deck like this, just play 1-for-1s. You can't play a kill spell to kill their guy and then let them kill your guy, because at the end, you might just have no threats left and not be able to do anything. So you need to be trying to generate some card advantage. But you're not playing blue, you're not going to be playing fact or fiction or drawing lots of cards, you need to have another way of doing it. So Dark Confidant is your way of getting extra cards. The average casting cost in the deck is, I would guess about 1, I haven't worked it out. It's quite low because 25 of the cards are lands.
Right.
That means you get to draw an extra card each turn and beat down. So he's a small threat. He doesn't kill people very quickly, but he does the job, and he sits and draws you cards.
And it's hard to ask for more than that. So the deck does a lot more than simply just cast creatures. Let's look at some of the other cards in the deck. We're going to see Thoughtseize, Liliana, Inquisition of Kozilek. Now, the thing all these cards have in common, they're discard spells. They attack the hand. Why do you want to do that in a deck like Jund?
So these 3 cards kind of sit in 2 different categories. The Thoughtseize and the Inquisition go together. They let you target, work against decks where they have specific cards that you need to answer. So that might be things like cards like Angel of Restoration or specific combo cards, so Birthing Pod, that kind of stuff, where you just need them to not have the card. And the reason some people have a different split, we decided that there were plenty of cards in this format which cost more than 3 mana, and therefore you don't really want to Inquisition and not take anything important. You need to hit. The format doesn't seem as though it's too aggressive, so we think you can afford the 2 life from Thoughtseize, and that just lets you take anything and keeps you safe.
Right,
so Inquisitions are the extra Thoughtseizes in this deck, probably.
Sure.
Liliana, on the other hand, well, it plays different roles against different decks. So some decks need to store cards in hand in order to get there. Against them, you can just drop Liliana, keep plussing it, go down to 1 creature of yours on the board, hopefully nothing of theirs, and sit there and not worry about it and lock them out of the game, and eventually you will win.
For sure. So Liliana also can help kill creatures. There's a lot of other cards in the deck that can blow a creature up, so let's take a look at some of those. All right, we see 4 copies of Lightning Bolt, 2 Terminates, 2 Maelstrom Pulse, 2 Jund Charm. A lot of ways to remove creatures from the board. How did you arrive at this particular mix?
So the reason you want the most Lightning Bolts is it's versatile, it's cheap, it's easy, it goes to the face. It's never a dead card. At worst, if they have no creatures, you can shoot them and it gets you there a little bit faster. So that's why you want 4 of that. The rest of the split, Terminate and Maelstrom Pulse kind of go together. There's another choice, you can play Abrupt Decay. They all do similar sorts of things. It really depends on what kind of cards you expect to be facing. So for example, Abrupt Decay only kills things that cost 3 or less. Therefore, we thought it was a little bit risky when there's, again, cards like Birthing Pod and Angel floating around. Plenty of stuff it doesn't kill.
A lot of the same reasoning behind why you only played 2 Inquisition of Kozilek,
yes,
right?
Exactly. So you need to be able to kill creatures. Terminate does that better than pretty much anything else. You don't want restrictions about which color or if it's an artifact or anything like that.
Sure.
Straight up, it's very easy. Maelstrom Pulse is a little slow and clunky sometimes. On the other hand, it's a general catch-all answer that does what you need. If they do anything, you have an answer. Very rarely are you killing multiple permanents. Sometimes that happens and then you smile. But generally, yeah, it just sits there and it says whatever kind of threat they play, if they're doing something you don't understand or a deck you didn't know about, you've got maybe an answer for it. If they lay down a difficult enchantment, you can do something.
Sure. And finally, Jund Charm, speaking of not knowing what they're doing, I don't even know everything this card does. So do you use all 3 abilities a lot, or are you playing it for one of them?
I like it, yes, for all 3 abilities.
Okay.
The 2 main ones are removing a graveyard from the game. So there's decks like Eggs or Storm, which rely on the graveyard.
Right.
You remove it in response to them trying to win.
Right.
And they don't win, hopefully. Then the 2 damage to everything. There are a lot of small, efficient creatures in this format. So not like Tarmogoyf, but like Dark Confidant.
Right.
The 3-mana hexproof guy. Whose name?
Geist of St. Traps, Step Links, things like that.
There's a ton of stuff it kills. People are playing cheap threats to be able to get in damage quickly. So Jund Charm is an expensive pyroclasm. It's instant speed, and you get to run it, and it isn't only a pyroclasm. So that's kind of relevant.
For sure.
Lastly, the 2 counters mean that it isn't ever a completely dead card. If you're playing against a deck which doesn't have creatures and doesn't use the graveyard, so things like Scape Shift, then at worst, you can at least pump your guy. It's not what you want to do, but the card does something, and if you top deck it, it might get you there.
Doing something way better than doing nothing, of course. Yeah. So that takes us through the spells. Now let's look at the lands in the Jund deck. We're going to start out with Treetop Village, Raging Ravine. We spent some time talking earlier about some of the defining cards in Modern. These 2 lands, a big part of that. Now, if you look at Raging Ravine, spending 5 or 4 mana plus your land to make it 3/3 doesn't seem like the most exciting thing in the world. Same thing with Treetop Village. Why are these cards so important?
So Raging Ravine is quite expensive, and you don't actually hope to activate it too much. But the reason you're running both of them is it gives you a long game. So I said earlier that you don't want to be trading 1 for 1, but quite a lot of your cards do that. Sometimes you do. It lets you grind people out. So you can just trade off cards until you both have nothing left, except you've got land, and they've got lands, and some of your lands attack for damage, and that's quite useful. Treetop Village is significantly better. Okay, it's only 1 color, but you can support that. It's the fact that it is only 2 mana to activate and then 1 to attack, and it gets in there. So you can sometimes do that quite early in the game. So for example, if you think they're holding up a counter spell, then it lets you get in underneath and put damage on them without letting them remand your, threats, whatever else they're trying to play. Raging Ravine is kind of the 5th and 6th Treetop Villages. They're not as good, but they get the job done, and at least they make colored mana.
For sure. So these are the lands that do something. These are the lands that you can win the game with. Let's very quickly run through the rest of the lands that let you cast your spells. First, we're going to see Verdant Catacombs, Marsh Flats, paired with Twilight Mire. This usually means you can get your colors online, even in a 3-color deck, pretty quickly. Let's take a look at some of the other lands. We see Blood Crypt, Stomping Ground, Overgrown Tomb. Back in Return to Ravnica, obviously you can get them with your fetch lands. Again, they're why this deck can cast its spells. And finally, we close out actually with 4 copies of Blackcleave Cliffs in addition to a forest and a swamp. Now, why 4 of this land?
So again, the format is maybe not that aggressive, but very fast. You need to be doing things on your first 3 turns. You can't sit back and wait like you can in Standard. So this card says red or black on turn 1, 2, or 3, and that's what you want. You need to be able to cast your Thoughtseize, your bolts to answer their small creatures. It lets you start playing the game early, especially when you have 6. It comes into play tapped lands, which can make you a slightly clunky slow deck.
Right, so that takes us through the main deck. Let's very quickly look at the sideboard right here. First, you see an additional Jund Charm, an additional Kitchen Finks. I'm a little more interested in the other cards. So let's take a look at those. We're going to see, I believe we can look at the next slide. Ancient Grudge, Sowing Salt, Grafdigger's Cage, Grudge for artifacts, Sowing Salt, principally good against the Urzatron decks. They can't have the mana to cast their spells. Grafdigger's Cage, taking care of anything cast from the graveyard, as well as Birthing Pod. Let's take a look now at the final couple of cards. Thrun the Last Troll and Sword of Light and Shadow. Why this particular sword?
So this comes out mainly of our not having tested quite enough, and so there's a little bit of a hope. So what I'm about to say might not be true. The idea is we thought that blue-white and Jund would be the two biggest decks. If that's the case, we think this is a relevant sideboard card against both of them. Like I said earlier, you can't choose to beat Jund or blue-white. You have to find some way of winning gradually. Maybe this does that. So against blue-white, it gives you protection from their paths and most of their creatures. They can't profitably block a creature which has +2/+2 and protection from white. The life gain, again, lets you keep going, and the creatures, it's all, you just want to try and generate value in some way, get some cards and keep alive and eventually kill them.
Right. Okay, well that takes us through the Jund deck. Thank you very much, Daniel. Again, I'm Zac Hill. This is the Tournament Center. Let's get back to Marshall at the desk.